Welcome to Let's Talk Micro. Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Micro. I hope you had a great week. Before we get started, remember that Let's Talk Micro is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, Google Podcasts, Overcast, TuneIn Radio, Stitcher, Pandora. Wherever you listen to your podcast, you can find Let's Talk Micro. I am also on Instagram as Let's Talk Micro, no apostrophe, and I am on Twitter as Let's Talk Micro 1. So please go ahead and follow. So today is a great episode because today we're talking micro. I mean, we always talk micro, but we are actually having an interview a little bit later on. So it's always good to connect with other microbiologists. So let's do a quick recap of what happened on the last episode. So we started talking about tests and biochemicals that you can do for gram-negative cocci. I talked about oxidase. Of course, if you want to know more about oxidase, go ahead and tune in to episode 10 of the podcast. It's a good episode with good information about oxidase. So for gram-negative cocci, Neisseria and Moraxella, they are oxidase positive. I also touch more about a little bit of background on the gram-negative cocci. Like I talked about Neisseria gonorrhea, right? How it causes gonorrhea. So it's the leading cause of sexually transmitted diseases. You can have you can also have pharyngitis, cervicitis, and conjunctivitis. I also talked about Neisseria meningitidis, which colonizes the oropharyngeal and nasopharyngeal mucous membranes. I also talked about the NPN, which is the non-pathogenic Neisseria. So they're a group that they tend to be respiratory flora, but they can cause infections. And when they do, they can be bacteremia, endocarditis, and meningitis. And I said non-pathogenic Neisseria. So when you hear the term NPN, it's referring to non-pathogenic Neisseria. I also went over another test that we go over in school, which is the acid detection test, which involves the use of cysteine trypticase agar with 1% of a carbohydrate such as glucose, maltose, lactose, and sucrose. And it has phenol red as an indicator. And when acid is produced due to fermentation, the medium changes from red to yellow. And I went over the reactions. Since we have the interview today, I'm not going to go in detail with this. If you want a refresher, just go ahead and go back to the previous episode and you can relearn them. But I did say that this test is not recommended by the CDC because you can have false negative results. It doesn't work for oxidative Neisseria. So you can have some false negative results. So we have other tests. For example, the molecular side of it plays a big role. Like we do PCR for like Neisseria gonorrhea, which they typically order in conjunction with chlamydia. And then for that you can have like a cervical swab, genital swab, urine. And then you can also do PCR like for Neisseria gonorrhea, Neisseria meningitidis. As far as once they grow on the agar, we can also do, right? I talk about Vitek, Molotov, and then I went over 2 different media that you can use for Neisseria gonorrhea and Neisseria meningitidis. MTM, which is modified Thayer-Martin, which is used for the isolation of Neisseria gonorrhea and Neisseria meningitidis. And then you have Martin-Lewis, which is for the isolation of Neisseria gonorrhea. And I went over the ingredients and the difference between modified Thayer-Martin versus Martin-Lewis on the previous episode. So if you're still not quite clear, if you want a quick refresher, go ahead and refer to the previous episode. And that was about it regarding gram-negative cocci. So now we move on to the interview. So as part of our talking micro conversations, I have been trying to bring microbiologists that not only that do work outside of the clinical microbiology field, something a little bit different. There's so many things we can do in this field. So as part of this today, we have a clinical laboratory scientist that she works in micro, but not exactly on the clinical hospital side of it. And as we go on, you'll find out more about what she does, but she tests the organs that are going to go to donors just to make sure that there are no organisms. So she has agreed to come on board. Her name is Dania Casellas. So, and here she is. Hi, Dania.
Hi everyone.
How
Hello.
are you?
Greetings. Good. How you doing
Pretty
this?
good. Thank you for agreeing to come into Let's Talk Micro.
Thanks for having me.
So, just tell the audience a little bit about yourself as far as like your education and stuff like that.
Sure. So I grew up in Tampa, Florida, and I went to school at the University of South Florida. I found out about well, the degree was called medical technology over there, and I found out about it in high school actually through one of my like clubs I was a part of for like health careers and everything. So I was like, oh, this sounds pretty good. You know, I get to work in the background in the lab and you're still an important part of the medical team and everything. But I like the fact that we're kind of, you know, it's a good job for introverts, just kind of in the background, but still doing important things. So I started my first job in New York City. I moved up there after I graduated from USF. So I worked up there in some pretty prestigious hospitals. A lot of fun. Got to see a lot of different microbes. And then I also went to graduate school there at Hunter College, and I got my graduate degree in biomedical lab management. So that was a lot of fun too. And then so I worked at a couple different labs in New York City, and then I moved back down here to Florida. And now I'm working more with tissue banking and organ donation. You know, making sure there's no pathogenic bacteria growing on the tissues that are being transplanted to recipients.
Okay, so you mentioned New York. Was it in the city or upstate?
Yeah, it was in Manhattan. Yep, a couple different labs in the
Wow, so that
city.
was an experience. Like you had to like ride the subway and all that.
Yeah, yes, I was living the city life. It was fun. It's way different from, you know, the lifestyle we have here in Florida. It's a little bit slower here. So when I go to New York, it's a little bit of a culture shock, but you know, the energy is different, the vibes, but it was a lot of fun working
Wow.
and living there.
And New York is a licensed state. So,
Yes,
but when
correct.
however you so you went when you went to school here in Florida, you took the AACP, and then they
Hmm.
took that in lieu of a test.
Yes, if I remember correctly, I got I did the ACP here. And then when I went to New York and to apply for their New York license, I just had to send my ACP scores and I believe my transcripts from USF. And I think that was it because that was like back in 2011 now. But I think that's what I had to do. So it was a pretty swift transition.
Okay,
But
and yeah, for the benefit of the listeners and maybe those of you that do not work here in the States, so we go through a clinical laboratory sciences program. It's typically 2 years. There's definitely different settings. Sometimes you do a bachelor's and then you do that program. Some universities you do like a 2 and 2, where you do 2 years of prereqs and then you finish the last 2 years, like the one at the University of Central Florida, and then you graduate with the bachelor's in clinical lab science. So upon finishing that program, in order to work in a lab, we need a certification. And there's various ones out there. The one that we were talking about is the ASCP, American Society for Clinical Pathology. So you take that test, and basically with that, you are able to, in a way, you can work in any state here. However, there are some states like we were talking about that they require a state license. Florida being one of them. And the process is like they do take your ASCP instead of you having to take an exam for that license. They take your ASCP, of course, your transcripts, prove that you completed the program, and then they will issue the license. Here in Florida, you have to renew it every 2 years, and everyone renews it at the same time. It's typically in August. With the pandemic on 2020, it got extended till November. But yeah, that's how it goes. Okay, so then you came to Florida. So tell us what you do right now. What's your daily responsibilities? What do you do in the lab?
Yes, a day in the life of my microbiology job. So, like I said, we do specialize, I guess, in tissue banking. So basically, for anyone out there who is a organ donor, it's a little insight into what happens after you pass away. So basically, someone passes away, they bring them to our facility. We actually have different facilities in different parts of the country. Well, at least Georgia and Puerto Rico also. So when they send us a donor, they procure different bones and tissues, tendons and ligaments, and they bring them to our facilities. And basically, they swab each tissue site with a sterile swab, and they drop it into a thioglycolate broth. And those broths, we incubate them for 2 weeks, or maybe about 16 days, because we don't work on the weekends here. We are very lucky. So they'll incubate for 2 weeks. And what we do is check those broths every day, look for any signs of growth, which would be cloudiness, turbidity, bubbles at the top forming. And if there's something growing, then we'll take it out from the incubator and we'll start processing it with we have an SOP that we follow, obviously. So if you want, I can go into like what we do after we pull it, but usually that's the main thing we do to start the process.
Okay, so translating that into the clinical lab hospital setting. So, like as I talked about in other episodes, so we get our sample, right? Let it be whatever, it could be a swab, body fluid. We process it right away. We do a gram stain, and then we put it on typically blood chocolate McConkey. We can add a PEA depending on the source. We do anaerobic agar, and then we incubate it. So your first step when you get that sample is put it in a thio. And then you said, of course, you incubate it at least over 2 weeks
At least 2
to
weeks.
make sure. And
Yeah.
those of you that already work in micro, you're already thinking, oh yeah, 2 weeks, right? Because we do get those requests about propionibacterium, or what is called now Cutibacterium, that you get this
Yes.
typically from surgeons. They're like, okay, no, hold that sample for 2 weeks because I want to make sure you rule out Cutibacterium. It is my experience that if it is there, you get it within 5 days, but that's what the doctor orders, and of course we honor that request. But typically, it's just my opinion, as you incubate it longer and longer, you might increase the chances of contaminating it. You open that thing, try to make a gram stain, find that, so you might introduce something, but that's another subject. Okay, so you check for cloudiness, and then so you don't do a gram stain from the beginning. You do it if you see cloudiness.
Right. If we see something going on, then we'll
Okay,
do
yeah.
a gram stain on it.
So then let's say that you do see cloudiness, you do a gram stain, then what's your next step?
Okay, so we see cloudiness, we do the gram stain, and usually, like when I was working in the clinical lab, we go by what the site is to tell you which plates to sub it to. For us, we go by the gram stain. So we do our gram stain, depending which morphology or gram negative rod, GPC, gram positive rods, depending on what we see, we'll put it to certain plates. We are very limited to what plates we use. In a clinical lab, you have like your hectoin and stuff for stools and everything. And we are very straightforward in our lab. It's either, I'll do the list. If we see gram positive cocci or gram positive cocci pairs and chains, it's just a blood. If we see gram positive rods, we do blood agar and also CDC. And then for anaerobic incubation. And then if we have gram negative rods, we will do McConkey, blood, and also a kanamycin vancomycin plate. And I think that's it. So it's very straightforward, just depending on what we see on the gram stain.
So I say, you don't do chocolate?
No, we don't do any chocolate. There's no chocolate in our lab. Only when we have the CAP deficiencies come in, we'll order some chocolate for that. But aside from that, we don't do any chocolate.
Okay. Oh, that's I guess that's interesting. Yeah.
I know it was weird when I first started working there.
Yeah. I think because the way what I'm thinking, especially for Haemophilus,
Mm-hmm.
and as I have worked in various facilities, I know like sometimes with the anaerobic agar, some facilities they do put a chocolate anaerobically as well in case that there's a Haemophilus that you cannot see.
Mm-hmm.
But okay, so this is just so you see your gram-positive rods, and then you do at the same time. So you incubate a blood aerobically and
Mm-hmm.
a CDC anaerobically.
Anaerobically. Yep.
Okay. And then with the gram-negative rods, you do the same process.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. At this point in time, so you incubate your agar, and then what do you do as far as biochemicals and testing?
Yeah, so for our biochemicals, so we don't have any kind of instrumentation in our lab. You know, a lot of labs now have MALDI and Bitech, Cepheid, and all the PCR. We don't have anything. So we're a little bit old school. So depending on what's growing on our plates the next day, or for our anaerobes, we check them 48 hours later. So for anaerobes, we usually do the rapid ana. So we get a lot of I still call it P. acnes, but we get a lot of Putibacterium in our samples for like the main organism that we see in our lab. So we use a rapid ana with that. So quick 4-hour test turnaround time. So that's great. For gram-positive cocci, we get a lot of coagulase negative staph. We don't go any further with identification, usually Staph aureus. So we'll do our Bacti-Staph latex for a quick result for that. And if it does come out to be Staph aureus, we'll use our, oxacillin plate to check for MRSA. And so incubate that for 24 hours with a fresh culture and check for growth. What else do we do? Oh, for check for streptococci, if we have alpha hemolytic colonies, we will do bioesculin salt. We do the BHI brain heart infusion. It's like the little purple liquid in there. Mm-hmm. And also opticin disc, if it's alpha hemolytic, to check for strep pneumo. We do the same thing to check for group D enterococcus. We check for the slants. The slant will turn black if it's group D, and we'll also look for the purple to yellow color change for the sodium broth. I'm trying to keep everything straight. And then what else do we do? For gram-negative rods, pretty straightforward. We use the API E20E. And then if it's oxidase positive, we'll use rapid NF for our non-fermenters, another 4-hour rapid turnaround time. And we have a couple other rapid tests that we use, but we don't use them too much because we usually see only a couple different organisms there. And honestly, that's the extent of the testing that we do. We don't really do anything crazy. Like I said, very old school, straightforward methods for identifications.
Okay, so it's mostly between biochemicals and media and tests.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So you don't get a lot like no Vitec and none of that.
No Vitec. It wouldn't be like cost effective at all for us, with the PMs and the reagents and everything. It just wouldn't be worth it whatsoever.
Yes, and that's a good point that you're bringing up. And for your listeners out there, it all depends. Yeah, you definitely have to justify your volume so you can get more instruments, and because they definitely do cost. And like you were saying, mm-hmm. You have an instrument, so per your regulations in the lab, you need to do PM, which is preventive maintenance on it. Depending on what it is, sometimes calibrations. You have to run controls, keep those policies up to date. So there's a lot of work behind the scenes than just running a sample. So if you cannot justify mm-hmm. the cost, so maybe some of you out there that work in huge labs, you might be thinking, well, this is like, maybe somewhat simplistic, like you said, old school. But it is, right. If you're in a small facility or you don't get as much volume, that's what you're going to have. And it definitely works out because mm-hmm. if your volume is low, you might not see anything, like you say, maybe some CNSs.
Yeah, that's the only thing. It was definitely one of the sacrifices I felt I had to make coming to this lab. Like I said, we don't work weekends. That is a gem. You don't find that anywhere.
Wow, yes.
But at the same time, we don't have that variety of bugs we used to see in New York City. When we get a gram-negative rod here, we are ecstatic. We're like, oh my God, I have an E. coli, which in a clinical hospital, you say it every day. It's whatever. So it's a lot of changes with this place, but I still like it. The old school methods are still pretty fun to do though.
Yeah, they definitely help out. And like this is something that I do like to say over and over with automation. It comes like younger techs, they're doing the test less and less. And definitely by doing this old school tests, like we call them, you definitely learn to recognize your organisms. So you pretty much, and I like to say this, by the time that you put it on one of these tests, you should have a pretty good idea of what it is.
Right.
That way, if something goes wrong, you know where to turn. And this is one of the downsides of the MALDI-TOF. So you're like out of school, you're like, why do I need to do all this test when something's gonna give me the answer
exactly
in 10 minutes?
Machine will tell me. Yeah.
But then of course, if you don't know what you're looking at, or you scan your wrong place, someone else sets up the wrong organism, then you end up releasing that ID, and then it's more work because you put that patient in harm. You potentially get in trouble when all you had to do was do those biochemicals, rule some things in, rule some things out, and then that's it. I mean, this is all about the patient. So we definitely need to know what we're doing and what we're working with. And I think all tests, they definitely help out a lot.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So you say you get excited when you get an E. coli?
Oh my God. Yeah. I know it's so basic for microbiologists, but for us, we're like, oh my God, the lactose fermentation. It's so pretty. But yeah, we don't see it a lot here. And we do see some Clostridiums though. I've gotten some of those. So something else as I mentioned, not every microbe that's growing on the tissue is considered dangerous. Kind of the same in the lab, you have more than a more pathogenic. So for us, the big dogs are group A strep and Clostridium. If we actually have those growing on the tissue, they won't use it at all to be transplanted because, they produce toxins or whatever. So it's just more of a threat and a safety measure. So we don't use the tissue at all if those things are growing on there.
There are some organisms that it can still be used?
Yeah, so we have different categories. So what they'll do, if there's a category 2, which is usually like the gram-negative rods and some other kinds, they'll do a special, they'll give like the tissue a special treatment with different antibiotics and stuff to make sure that all those bugs will be, eradicated from the tissue. And they'll still be able to use it for certain processes or to make certain products. But with some of the category 3, which is like the bad guys, they won't use the tissue at all, just for like safety purposes or whatever.
Okay. So you were mentioning Clostridium. So which ones have you gotten?
I've gotten Clostridium difficile every now and then. What were the other ones that we get? Sometimes just call it species if we can't get like the whole name or whatever, the whole ID. But what were some of the Sardelli? I actually want to Google a little bit because we don't get them too much, but sometimes you're like, oh my God, Clostridium. I won't Google for some time for that. But yeah, when we get those, we're like, oh, this is bad. And then we have to, do away with the tissue. And like the spready hemolytic ones are the ones where we're like, oh my God. Perfringens, that's what I was trying to think of.
Okay.
So that one, yeah, for sure.
Yes, definitely. And we do, of course, as microbiologists, that we do get excited when we see this stuff. And it's, of course, we do this work for the patients. And when we find something that is pathogenic, like really bad for the patient, I mean, we try to get it out there as soon as possible so the patient can get that treatment, and we feel bad for them. But from the point of the science, it's definitely exciting because you're like, oh my goodness, like you see something unusual, because, it makes us better at what we do. It's like we see unusual things and then we keep in our minds and we are able to recognize them better. So having said that, I do remember the one time that I had my first Clostridium perfringens, and it was so exciting. I'm like, I opened that plate, I see that double zone of beta hemolysis, and I'm like, oh, wow. And then, yeah, it was so exciting to produce that ID. And then, of course,
and the smell, the wonderful smell that it comes with. Follow your nose.
And then I look at the patient's, history, and then it says, of course, a patient history of amputations, and which goes with, it causes, the gas gangrene. So it's very sad for the patient, but it was so cool to see that what the textbooks describe, that double zone of of beta hemolysis. So it's definitely
Yeah, you
exciting,
see it
yes.
live for sure.
Okay. And then, so with your organisms, as far as, so you said that if you do have Staph aureus, you rule out MRSA.
Hmm.
As far as any other susceptibilities, you don't do any.
Yeah, not at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how does it work? Like, for example, so patient is on the list, let's say for a transplant, and then do they wait until you release that information to the transplant, or sometimes there's
Yes, there's like a very long list of qualifications or eligibility criteria that tissue has to go through before it even goes into the OR to be, transplanted into someone else. But one of like, definitely we have to give out our report that everything is negative, or, we give it out to our manager, and then she will give it out to, we have our director who looks at each result before it goes out. But I actually didn't know when I first started working there. Like for me, I was like, okay, cool. Tissue comes out of the person, it's transplanted within like a couple days or weeks, but it's actually months. So the tissue, it's frozen for a very long time at extremely low temperatures, to keep it viable, for a very long time before it's ever transplanted. So, like I said, it's just like a long list of criteria it has to pass through, and then it's given to the new recipient or whatnot. So it takes a really long time from start to finish. After getting through micro, and even after it gets through us, there's still another list of things it has to go through before like the finished product.
makes sense. And you said you don't work weekends, so are you on sometimes on call?
We're not in the tissue bank, so they're actually tissues and organs are two different sides. So for the organs, those have to be transplanted obviously much quicker than like tissues and bones can. So there's a whole immunology and serology team on the other side of the building, and they're on call 24 hours, 7 days a week around the clock. So whenever, because you don't know when organs going to come in, right? Can't really plan that. So for those testings, they're all the time. So they have to, like all the HIV, syphilis, everything that they have to test for. It's actually a whole different department for that.
So just to summarize for the listeners out there, so you see the differences and the similarities. So whereas we get the sample, we go gram stain and media at the same time, and then incubate, and then from there do the test. So it's like you plate, then gram stain, then media, and then perform the ID. So, and then as far as what's the most unusual organism that you have seen?
Ever? Or
Yeah.
in my work?
Well, I mean, and in your work, yeah. And then we'll get to ever, yeah.
Here, we don't really get. There is a Pseudomonas. Oh my God, what was species? Orzi habitant or something. Yeah, I got to
Yes,
see that one, which
or
is
the
weird. I would
habitants.
think I would see that in like the clinical lab, but somehow it was on a tissue. We got to see it here. I didn't even know that one existed, honestly. I was like, well, that's kind of weird. But ever, ooh, I'd have to think about that one. Because I know sometimes we had a parasitology lab in New York City, and sometimes they would get like some weird like worms and stuff or whatever. But I don't know. It's like the weirdest thing I've seen though. I saw so much in New York. I don't know. I'd have to think about it. I'll get back to you.
Okay, that's fine. So then, like I said, so there's not a lot of volume. So typically in a day, you're working with about how many samples
For talking
on
like gram
average?
stains on a busy day, it would probably have to be like 40 slides or so. That's on the busier side. I'm making about 40 gram stains, which is honestly not that much compared to a clinical lab. But for us, since it's only one person working on all the gram stains in one day, that can kind of be a lot. Because we also, like I said, we're a little archaic in our lab, so we don't have like barcodes that like label barcodes that go on the plates or everything. We have to handwrite stuff. So instead of working, I don't know if you guys use Cerner, like your LIS on the computer, we don't work electronically. We literally have it's like little index cards of paper, and we write all the like information for that sample, or we type it out and then print it. And then, but when we're actually doing our workup, we write everything down, like, oh, blood agar, coagulase negative, non-hemolytic, it's all written out. So you would think, okay, well, 40 slides isn't that much, but when you're like writing out your cards and like doing all these old school testings, it can be a little bit more laborious than what, in the lab where you just type everything out, draw on a machine kind of thing. So it's a little different, but yeah, I would say like about 40 slides every day, or thiotubes that we're pulling from the incubator on average in a day, depending.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, and like you mentioned, definitely, those of you out there that if you work in a large facility, you might think, oh, 40 gram stains. I mean, I do that in a
Right.
shift and that's it. I mean, but yes, as you're in a smaller facility and there's less personnel, so then you definitely have to do all that stuff. So 40 stains in a smaller facility, it's a lot, especially like you described, if
There's
you're
only 3 of
handwriting
us,
stuff.
so
Typically,
it's tiny.
yes, typically even in a clinical lab, a smaller section, the one that's reading plates, sometimes has to get up and do rapid testing, do COVID
Stats,
testing.
yeah.
So it's not the same as a large facility. Well, all you're doing is, oh, I'm going to gram stain all day. So I can get 40, 50 slides, no problem. So it can be challenging. I definitely see that. I mean, I have worked in both small and large facilities, and
Each has their
I see
challenges.
the contrast. Yes. So yeah, I mean, this is definitely, like I say, it's definitely very important work because, of course, with so many patients in our country that need transplants, we definitely have to make sure that these, these organs, they are free of organisms and they're not gonna cause harm to the patient. So it's a very important work. So as far as working in that field, as far as education, it's just as a clinical lab scientist, you can work in that field. Doesn't need any more education than that, or did
No,
did the
not
masters help
necessarily,
you,
but
or?
I didn't even know this like tissue banking world existed until I was moving back from New York City, and like someone had called me about the job, but I didn't need anything extra to work, specifically with tissue banking or anything. I just same thing, I had to be licensed as a clinical lab scientist, and that's about it. I mean, my master's is more geared towards like management, so I wouldn't say like it helped me get into this realm specifically. So yeah, which was great. I was like, what? No weekends? Let's go. What's up? So it was good.
Okay, and so you definitely, you like micro. Do you see yourself doing this, or do you have any plans to maybe be grow up in management or do
I don't
another
know. It's hard.
side of micro?
When I got my master's, I was like, yeah, I can move up in the ranks and go for supervisor or manager, but that comes with different responsibilities. And, you have to look at it to, obviously, yes, there's more money. Everyone likes that, but are you leaving the bench work, which is why I fell up with micro in the first place, to be working on the bench with the microbes. And sometimes when you get into, like higher positions, it's more paperwork and managing people and scheduling, just fine. But you're leaving behind like, the guts of like why you started working in micro. So I've gone back and forth. Like I've honestly, I've never applied for a higher position. So I just felt like I really like working the bench. So, just gotta have to think about, where your priorities are at, what's more important for you, what's more fun, what's gonna make you happy, honestly. So, but yeah, I really love working the bench. So I think about it sometimes, but I like the bench.
I mean, I agree definitely. If you're trying to keep that like that work life balance, I mean, working on the bench, yeah, you just do your work, do your organisms, you're definitely involved in it. And as someone that I have done both, definitely when on the management side, like the work doesn't stop when you leave. I mean, you still get, so you are in the middle of a dinner, and then next thing you know, you have a text message, hey, I'm not coming to work. So then you have to start seeing, okay, am I short? Am I doing, who do I get to come in? So you're texting everyone. So it doesn't really, yeah, it doesn't end. So it's just, if that's something like you want, you have to be prepared that you're gonna be working
usually you can just
outside
go
of
home and
the
it's on your
lab.
bench, like go do whatever you want. But when you're up for positions, it's like,
yeah. Yeah, as a bench, like, yeah, I think sometimes, the only maybe that I will think about it if I was at home was just, did I put this plate in the incubator, or
Yeah, yes, I know exactly what you're
That's
talking
a
about.
bad feeling. Like you're like, did I leave my tray out, or did I come back to work in the
Like,
morning and nothing has grown? Or
yeah, yeah.
yeah, so that was my worst worry. I mean, when I was on the bench, but yeah, on the management, it's more challenging. So I mean, as you have seen, there's definitely a lot of demand in our profession. Um, I don't think there's a huge unawareness about what we do. Um, Typically, people find out, they're gonna graduate or they're already graduated in something else, and then turns out that a friend of a friend did the program, and then you look into it, or by accident you're looking at something and it's like, oh, look at this. What do you think we can do to promote more awareness of our field?
Um, my first thing is always social media. I love Instagram. I know you're on there too, so I love your page because you advocate so hard for microbiology and you give out such great quality information. And for me, like I love sharing what I do in my stories. I think sometimes we think like, well, who wants to see stuff about microbiology? No one cares about the lab, but you don't know that. And just sharing your passion about what we do is gonna like, obviously you can entertain other people with your stuff, and obviously it's the knowledge and information you're giving them. A lot of people don't know we exist. That's part of why we're shorts, so short staffed all the time. But use your social media. Don't be embarrassed about what you do. We do awesome work. Talk about it in your posts or whatever. And I think I feel like we used to do this in my lab, in the lab I'm in now. I'm sure if the pandemic's not going on, but sometimes they would send out people into the schools and like middle schools or whatever to talk about what we do, or tissue banking. So if your lab is ever looking for someone, or maybe you can bring it up to your manager or upper management and be like, hey, like how cool would it be to go out to the schools to talk to the kids about what we do as scientists? Because when kids are thinking about, when they're growing up, they're not going to be like, I want to be a microbiologist. Like they want to be doctors, the people who they see on the forefront. So yeah, just to get like our career out there. You never know. We can do presentations when stuff goes back to normal or whatnot. But yeah, I think social media in general is such a powerful tool. It's such an easy and free way to get knowledge out about what we do. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, nowadays with everyone being on social media all the time, um, I'm kind of happy in a way that when I was going through school, there wasn't that big social media because it would have been
Mm-hmm.
such a huge distraction. I think by the time I finished my bachelor's and everything, like maybe like the iPhones and stuff that were making their
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
way
it's
in.
coming up. Yeah.
But now it's like, yeah, it's definitely, but it is a great tool. And as I've been doing this page, I definitely seen like some of the medical lab sciences programs, they are creating Instagram pages.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to see if I see them, I reach out with my podcast,
Yeah.
bring more awareness, try to share their content as well. Because yeah, it's definitely a good tool. And like you said about the schools, that will definitely be something because yeah, me growing up, I never said I'm gonna be a medical lab scientist.
No one says that. Yeah.
Yeah, no one. It's always like I said, it's doctor, lawyer, maybe
Mm-hmm.
teacher.
Yeah.
And it's just like in my case, yeah, I was at the end of my first contract in the Navy, and then I was trying to find something to do that if I got out, I could do it on the outside.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I found out.
Yeah.
So I think if someone, especially once we get a better handle on COVID, and that sending maybe some reps and go talk to the school, some techs or some managers, and describe
Mm-hmm.
what we do. Talk to seniors
Yep.
in high school to see this is what you can do, the steps. So it will be very helpful. Yeah, and definitely yes, like I said, I do like your page as well, and you definitely put I love the pictures of the houses
Oh
and
yeah. Yes. I have a problem with looking at houses.
yeah, we're very beautiful. And then definitely you're into fitness and your workouts. So yeah, definitely you have some really good content out there.
Thank you. Thank you.
I don't know. Yeah, for me, it's been really hard. We talked about this before, you and I, but yeah, like getting more followers. And even though it seems like I'm on a good pace, but it's definitely, yeah, it's hard. You have to put some time in,
Yeah.
and
Oh yeah, it takes work for sure. Yeah.
yeah, especially that. And I'm on Twitter as well. And so yeah, you have to put some time.
Mhm. Yeah, it doesn't
Right?
happen overnight or anything, so it's
No.
consistency.
Is there anything else that you would like to tell the audience?
Um, no, I think that was it. Oh, well, I always encourage everyone to be an organ donor. That's something that, you're comfortable with and helping saving lives and enhancing lives. So, yeah, that's something you want to do. Save some lives.
Awesome. So there you have it, listeners. We have a medical lab scientist that works with donor testing. So something very interesting in our field, something different from the day-to-day plate reading, but at the same time, the contribution is very important because everything in this field is about what we do, especially about the people, getting a better understanding of the organisms, whether you're doing it in research or in the clinical side. So this type of work is definitely very important. Okay, so Dania, well, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye. And that, my dear audience, it's the end of this episode. I hope you enjoy listening to Dania Casellas because I certainly did enjoy it too. We see the differences, how varied the microbiology field is, what contributions you can make, right? With the interview with Carla Zamora, you saw that she works in environmental microbiology, making sure that the companies and their products, they don't have organisms that can be harmful to us. And then Dania works with something very important with organs. So many patients that for many reasons need transplants. We want to make sure that those organs don't have pathogens that can cause the patient harm. So it's great work. So definitely, I hope you enjoyed it. Continue staying motivated, staying safe. Bring that passion to work. That's so important. It's such a good work, such a great job that we do, and so important. So continue bringing that motivation. And of course, have a great week and continue talking micro. Until the next time, bye.